Wasn't part of the big Disney announcement, but here's the logo. So this is actually separate from The Mandalorian Season 3.
This is actually separate from The Mandalorian Season 3.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my god, stop fucking lying.
Oh great, another spin-off Star Wars series featuring an esteemed bounty hunter dealing with the inner workings of a criminal underworld on Tatooine. Surely the creative leads won't pull a Mando and have the show completely ignore that entire premise just so they can cram it full of filler material and cameos. That would be terrible. I'm almost impressed at this rate how Disney can turn one of Star Wars' most iconic and badass mercenaries. He's dumb, no one knows who he is, and nobody takes him seriously.
Look, old man.
My name is Boba Fett.
No one respects you.
Enough! What prevents us all from killing you and taking what we want?
I am Boba Fett.
It's downright unfathomable to think that these paint-huffing cockwaffles were handed a goldmine of potential Star Wars content. Material that practically writes itself. All they had to do was show Boba doing cool bounty hunter shit. It genuinely didn't have to go much deeper than that. And yet, to no one's surprise, Disney's Lucasfilm in catastrophic fashion managed to fuck everything up. So much that the best episodes of the season don't even have Boba in them. Though, they're still far from being perfect.
Dated a jowl for a while. They're quite furry. Very furry.
Why does Jon Favreau insist that this whimsically brain-dead mechanic be another addition to the list of recurring tumors in Star Wars? And it certainly doesn't help that she's arguably the most insufferable out of all of them. She's repeatedly broken deals with Din, altered or straight up lied about the nature of certain arrangements, and lacks the basic understanding of what ship classifications are.
Where's the Razor Crest?
I never said I had a Razor Crest. I said I had a replacement for a Razor Crest.
How the hell do you expect Din to carry out bounties with a starfighter? Prior to the Baby Yoda arc, he was essentially carrying out so many jobs that he had to put all of his targets in a massive refrigerator. He's a mercenary, for fuck's sake. And it doesn't help that you've only established why Din can't trust you and that he should look elsewhere for a replacement ship. Wait, what show are we watching again? Now I suppose there are an infinite number of ways I could approach this video, but I think the best place to start is with how adamant this show is to have Boba simp for the Tuskens, considering it's one of the first sequences we're shown. So, following his escape from the Sarlacc pit, a tribe of Tusken raiders arrive and kidnap Boba, where he's then dragged across the desert, repeatedly beaten, forced to dig for water, only to in turn be deprived of water, and is essentially forced to assimilate into their culture. So, obviously not exactly the types you'd want to share a black melon with. The Tuskens have been notoriously known and depicted as opportunistic scavengers, willing to take anything from anyone regardless of circumstance. It's by no means a well-kept secret on Tatooine that you'd think an experienced ex-bounty hunter such as Boba would be wary of. But despite all of that, and having a clear opportunity to escape to Anchorhead, he instead decides to stick around because he really likes hanging out with his captors.
The Tuskens took me in, made me part of their tribe.
Boba, the Tuskens are a bunch of slave-owning barbarians who torture/kill innocent people and immediately disassemble technology they don't know how to use. The only reason they didn't murder you is because you saved one of their heathen offspring from getting devoured by Machamp. They aren't just magically going to extend that courtesy to everyone now all of a sudden. Their culture sucks and you shouldn't be protecting it. But I suppose it's difficult to resist the temptation of a brain lizard. Seriously, what the fuck has Star Wars become? And I guess its main thing is helping people find sticks. Because I'm sure Boba would have way more practical use of a wooden staff than the literal arsenal at his disposal. Let's just remove the most practical option off the table because we need to have Tamura Morrison making vinegar strokes into the camera whenever he hits a goon with his stick. Though who am I kidding, everyone else in this abortion of a show seems to have forgotten that blasters exist altogether. which is pretty bizarre considering blasters are only used all the goddamn always throughout the OT and the prequels. Call me out of touch if you like, but I don't really see the utility with mercenaries or assassins using throwing knives and knuckle dusters as their go-to weapons, when arms dealing tends to be a pretty prevalent occurrence in the criminal underworld. Speaking of which, when Boba isn't constantly being a bitch and retreating to his back to tank so he can force hammer in more flashbacks, we're presented with the main plot of the series, if you could really call it that. As we discovered from the Season 2 finale of Mando, Boba has now taken the helm of Jabba's criminal empire, which left many of us wondering how he plans on organizing his current ranks to maintain the new operation. After all, it took a considerable number of people for Jabba to secure the palace itself, let alone to establish a dominant presence on Tatooine. Well, turns out we discover in the first episode that the only people in his crew are Fennec and a couple of newly recruited Gamorrean guards. So let's break this down a little bit further because there are a lot of layers to this type of stupid. Both he and Fennec somehow infiltrated Jabba's stronghold, assassinated Bib Fortuna, acquired the throne, all without amassing some type of gang or organization beforehand in order to pull any of this off. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to running and organizing crime rings, but I'd say that kind of leaves the door wide open for Boba to be taken out by one of Bib's confidants. There's nothing in place to prevent some random gang from bursting in and laying claim to everything. And it makes zero sense why Boba Fett, Jabba's longtime gun for hire, doesn't seem to grasp this basic fucking concept.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
It's frankly astonishing how oblivious Boba is to the fact that loads of people would want to have him killed for a plethora of reasons, and yet he's constantly removing the one thing that would prevent his otherwise certain assassination. Call me crazy, but I'd think an experienced mercenary who had somewhat recently escaped being devoured by a sarlacc and was nearly tortured to death by sand people would be a tad apprehensive about removing his armor in public. It's strange that these showrunners even bothered with providing some ounce of characterization and context for Boba's hardships and experiences when none of that material even remotely affects or has any relevance to how he operates in this universe. And it certainly doesn't help that this depiction of Boba has the intelligence of a fucking turnip.
The matter of tribute.
I'm confused.
He wants you to pay him.
What? I'm the crime lord. He's supposed to pay me.
This is a massive red flag. The main political figurehead of Mos Espa is refusing to acknowledge your claim as daimyo and is actively challenging your authority, to the point where he's demanding that you pay him tribute. Arguably one of, if not the most influential person in this city, has become your biggest roadblock with establishing your criminal enterprise. This seems like it's going to remain pretty relevant to the plot going forward. Moving on though, Boba and Fennec decide to take a stroll through town, do a little sightseeing, chat with the locals, get a general lay of the land. And as they're heading back towards the palace, wait, what's this? Why, they're suddenly ambushed by a group of assassins. I wonder who could have orchestrated this. Which, alright, we have to address how cancer-inducing this scene is. So for starters, Boba's initial reaction to being surrounded by a bunch of mercenaries with energy shields is to fire off a wrist rocket at point-blank range, which miraculously doesn't obliterate him or Fennec, despite all of the energy from the explosion being trapped in with them. Physics be damned, I guess, but we most certainly should examine some of the options that don't involve Boba potentially blowing his goddamn arm off, because there are quite a lot of them. Most notably, he has a jetpack. All he has to do is get to a workable height to gain the advantage, and from there Boba can utilize wrist rockets, thermal detonators, his standard blasters, or hell, even his knee rockets if he's so inclined. We've seen him do it in other Star Wars content, and it makes no practical sense why he wouldn't do the same here, especially when it could very well cost him his life if he refuses. But instead, Boba Fett just conveniently forgets in the moment that he's Boba Fett, and allows these pancake fucks to nearly stab him to death. Who are you and what have you done with the real Boba, you absolute lemon? This entire depiction is such a far cry away from the ruthless assassin willing to track down the Millennium Falcon, to operate alongside the Empire to put Han Solo in carbonite, and fend off Luke from impeding on his score. While he might have not had a dominant presence in the OT, it's indisputable there were key aspects of his character that were established in those films, and trying to argue that both these depictions portray the same Boba Fett is laughable at best. Speaking of which, you remember when I said earlier that the mayor refusing to pay Boba's tribute was a huge red flag that he should have picked up on? Well, turns out this world-renowned assassin who specifically trained to die before giving up client info reveals something very interesting.
I was sent by the mayor! The mayor sent me! Let me out!
Talk about wasted potential. You have an order of supposedly highly sought-after and well-trained assassins who are hired to take out Boba Fett in an attempt to undermine his criminal enterprise, and throughout the potential fallout of that, the client is completely cloaked in mystery. You could have the situation force Boba's hand, sending his ranks to shake things up, do some digging, demand some answers from prominent players in the plot, and throughout the process we learn where allegiances are set, standing amongst other factions, and who truly controls Mos Espa. All of that material effectively being thrown down the drain just so that this guy can bitch out after being interrogated for less than 2 minutes. Why bother with establishing the Order of the Night Wind and hinting at this character being a resilient assassin only to immediately shatter any ounce of mystery and kill him off shortly later anyways? You'd think this should be some massive plot twist that the show would dedicate a considerable amount of time towards. Granted, it's not like this Boba would be smart enough to uncover that, since he's basically incapable of discerning when people are clearly lying to him about trying to have him killed.
Who really sent the Night Wind? I have no motive. As you said, I serve at your pleasure.
And even if he truly didn't, why should Boba take the risk of leaving the mayor alive? He's already refused to give him tribute and has actively challenged his authority as daimyo of Mos Espa. This politician can claim he stands nothing to gain from his death, but that doesn't make it any less bullshit. Loads of people in rivaling gangs would stand to gain a lot from dethroning a daimyo. Money, power, influence, notoriety, just to name a few of them. This is effectively a stone that Boba can't leave unturned, but because he's unimaginably gullible, he and Finnick both spare the mayor's life. I'm sure this won't cause any problems in the plot moving forward. But anyways, just when things couldn't possibly reach any higher levels of stupid, just when you think the entire situation couldn't get any more out of Boba's depth, we're presented with another grand reveal. Apparently, the twins have arrived from Null Hutt to reclaim Jabba's throne. Not that it really makes much sense, considering they never seemed to give a damn when Bib was essentially running things, and he most definitely wasn't operating in the twins' best interest. Mos Espa has been in a complete power vacuum since Jabba's death, so what have these diabetic slugs been doing this entire time? Do they not have resources, contacts, mercs, spies who are loyal to the Hutts? Perhaps we could have gotten some characterization out of that, witnessing on camera how extensive their grasp is, to see the different lengths the twins are willing to reach to gain influence with all these different factions, to turn the tide in their favor. It'd be a true and proper obstacle for Boba to overcome as the acting daimyo. But instead, their whole plan for reacquiring their former cousin's palace is to simply show up, ask Boba for it, and leave if he says no.
Not a great plan.
So, a few problems with that. First off, the both of you traveled all the way from Null Hutt with the expectation that you were going to reclaim your territories, and all the muscle you bring with you is retarded Chewbacca here? Also, don't worry, I will have plenty to say about him later. But you do realize you're taking a monumental gamble by walking out into the middle of the street with practically zero cover or protection, hoping that Boba doesn't have the common sense to just shoot you both dead where you stand, especially after spilling the beans on what Plan B is. How convenient. Secondly, if you knew that Boba and all of his crew were at this bar, then why didn't you just storm the palace while no one was fucking there keeping tabs on it? Instead of having your lackeys break their spines by hauling your morbidly obese carcasses all across town, you could, arm them with weapons to maintain a more dominant hold of the palace, all while possessing the throne? Any form of standing or authority Boba has would effectively be stripped away from him because he no longer controls what is arguably the most strategic resource in the entire region. Though for better or for worse, everyone in this universe is bullshitting their way through the plot, so both parties end up going their separate ways. Moving on, however, we finally get our first scene of Boba actually doing crime syndicate things. I mean, it only took us 3 whole episodes, but by God, we got here somehow. And I have to say, I think I'm just a tad confused on what the hell it is a daimyo is supposed to do exactly. Are they tasked with keeping the peace, or running smuggling operations and extorting people for money? I know Boba spouts off this garbage at some point.
Jabba ruled with fear. I intend to rule with respect.
But it's kind of difficult to consider him a crime lord when he doesn't really commit any crime. Though at the same time, I'm certainly not about to look a gift bantha in the mouth. We're finally getting a moment where Boba has to deal with the responsibilities and reality of his new position, how it impacts the city of Mos Espa, and the potential for a new partnership. So this water merchant arrives to inform Boba of the obvious.
No one respects you.
Enough!
Apparently, the streets have become unruly since Bib's death, allowing more frequent raids on his inventory shipments from rivaling gangs. However, if Boba is able to get rid of them all, he'll double his tribute. Wait a minute, has hell finally frozen over? The writers actually managed to set up a decent plot point? I didn't think it was possible, but my god, it's beautiful. You have an ordinary merchant whose livelihood is drastically affected by Bib's death, sending Mos Espa into economic turmoil, while Boba is incentivized by profit to rid this city of this rivaling gang. It's certainly not anything elaborate, but it doesn't really have to be so long as it falls in line with what's taken place so far in the story, which it definitely does. And now the moment has come to... What in the false advertising dystopian hell am I looking at?
If you're a daimyo, then why'd you let the Monga charge us a month's wages for a week's war?
There is no work, mighty daimyo.
You have enough money to blow on these goofy-ass hover Vespas and crazy cybernetic implants, but not enough to buy water? Yeah, I just don't believe you, and neither should Boba. It doesn't matter how many times I'm told that these gang members are actually down on their luck credit pinchers barely managing to scrape by. If what's being shoved down our throats through exposition and what's being depicted on screen are antithetical to each other, then you fundamentally fail to properly establish these characters. Not to mention that nothing about this even visually fits in with the overall aesthetic. I'm sure Robert Rodriguez got giddy with excitement the moment he discovered that Star Wars has robotic prosthetics, but if you wanted to tell a cyberpunk-esque story, then just create a new IP. You don't have to pilfer and rape Star Wars of the little dignity it has left, just so you can depict this clean-cut, hover Vespa riding, cybernetically enhanced Starbucks drinking street gang. But unfortunately, this whole exchange gets even worse.
Then you will work for me.
They stole from me! And you're just going to let them off?
Yeah, Boba. Why the fuck are you letting them get away with it? This guy is supposedly one of the more profitable water merchants in the entire city, and he's willing to double his tribute to you for finishing the job. If other businesses get word that you have a reputation for backing out of deals and refusing to do the bare minimum of protecting their livelihood, then they aren't going to have any incentive to support your power structure. And we can't gloss over the fact that Boba mentions he isn't short on credits during a flashback scene.
I have plenty of credits. What I'm short on is muscle.
Credits can buy muscle.
Well, where the hell is all of your muscle then? Why did you decide to screw over a potential business partner, only to hire this random hover Vespa gang that are so goddamn awful at being criminals that they admit on the spot that they stole the shipment of water?
Where'd you get that water?
We stole it.
Boba, you are the actual worst. However, shortly thereafter, we then transition to Boba taking a nice long soak in his bacta tank, because apparently that's all he does for a majority of this damn show. But later that night, he's paid by a visitor. Have you ever seen something so cataclysmically and horrendously stupid that the only explanation for it is that we're living in a simulation? I mean, why else would a human being unironically write up something so painfully embarrassing? Because that's really what the show is. One catastrophic embarrassment after the other. And arguably the biggest aside from Boba himself is retarded Chewbacca. Imagine being put in the perfect scenario as a bounty hunter. The hit is asleep and unaware of your presence. There are no guards in the room, and you have a slew of weapons at your disposal to choose from. You could cut off the oxygen feed and lock him inside the tank, or fire off a lethal blaster bolt and quickly make your escape. But instead, retarded Chewie's immediate decision is to wake Boba up and throw him towards his weapon bench. You were effectively handed your target on a silver platter and you dropped it with your dumb, clumsy Wookiee hands. Also, why the hell doesn't Boba have some form of security posted in the room with him? He's had 2 people either blatantly lie or hint about trying to have him killed. Especially after that latest close call, you'd think Boba would be a little more on edge about being left alone in a room with a bunch of open windows while hooked up to his bacta tank. And the moment his security does show up, a majority of them aren't even using blasters. If there's any substantial evidence why everyone in the Disney Star Wars universe eats paint chips, it's this scene. But I do have another pressing question. If the twins are aware that retarded Chewie could very well botch this assassination, then why send him specifically to begin with? Boba's already confronted him earlier in Mos Espa, and he now has tangible proof that the twins tried to have him killed. If they had just sent some random merc that Boba doesn't know, there'd be no evidence trail leading back to them. However, with this new revelation, Boba is contemplating what his response will be. After all, the twins will definitely be on high alert after having botched such an easy assassination. Getting an opportunity to take them out will take some serious planning. And surely the twins wouldn't do something as idiotic as showing up to the front gate of the palace with 0 security detail just to apologize.
Krrsantan crispa uba.
Potluck honey.
Great! Now kill them, Boba!
Do it.
I offer him back if you renounce all claims to Jabba's legacy on Tatooine.
My disappointment is immeasurable. And my day is ruined.
Out of everything this show could have been, out of every single depiction of Boba we could have gotten, we ended up with this worthless turnip who won't even respond when people blatantly admit to his face that they attempted to have him killed, and that he believes on face value if he just gives the twins their assassin back that they'll fuck off back to Nal Hutta. That's truly the most disappointing thing as a fan. However, they then revealed that apparently all 3 of them were lied to. It turns out that the mayor of Mos Espa has already promised the territory to a different syndicate. Wow, Boba! The person who actively challenged your authority from the very beginning and attempted to have you killed is off making side deals with other factions to delegitimize your position. Who would have guessed? But as the twins are leaving, Fennec then asks Boba if he trusts what they've just told him.
I have no reason to believe them. They would benefit from their enemies fighting one another.
Now, I don't know if you're as confused as I am, because that line of logic sure doesn't seem to make any damn sense. If he genuinely doesn't trust them, then why even bother keeping them alive, or arrange to give them their go-to assassin back? And if the mayor's potentially conspiring with another syndicate, then you would want to catch him in the act. Announcing to him that you want to arrange an appointment is incredibly counterintuitive, since it only gives him more time to cover his tracks. Still, this is all very pressing information that you'd assume the both of them would immediately act on given the nature of most recent events. It would actually be incredibly weird of them not to, since their whole power dynamic is potentially being challenged. But nah, Boba decides he's gonna chill with his new Rancor instead.
I want to learn to ride this one.
You what?
I want to ride it.
I'm sure this line is totally unrelated to the plot and definitely isn't foreshadowing any upcoming wildly impractical fight scene. However, the moment has finally arrived for Boba to confront the mayor.
Did he just lock the door?
It's almost like waiting a million goddamn years to confront your biggest political rival, who attempted to have you killed and is rumored to be conspiring with other syndicates, wasn't such a great strategy. It's almost as if you should have gone straight here and not bothered with procedure, because that's what a competent crime lord put into this scenario would do. Or hell, even anyone with half a brain cell would do for that matter. And I'd imagine Boba would have picked up on some simple tricks people attempt to pull when running away from him, considering chasing bounties was only his literal profession for fucking years. Secondly, if the mayor suspected that Boba would barge into his office demanding answers or attempt to interrogate his aide for damning information, then why not have a bunch of guards posted outside the entrance? If you have evidence that you want to remain hidden, then you'd naturally have an armed detail protecting it, not some insufferable diplomat who immediately caves to any form of pressure.
Salutations! I am unarmed!
But that's okay, because we've now reached the part of the show where we have to vomit out the most non-Star Wars thing humanly imaginable. The current state of Lucasfilm, ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually rather impressed that they somehow managed to make the Paul Blart 2 chase scene look like a cinematic masterpiece in comparison. Now, there's so much to talk about from a world-building standpoint as to why this entire sequence is such eye cancer. For starters, his vehicle moves at an absolute snail's pace. And considering how much ground Boba can cover with his jetpack, it'd make way more sense for him to boot it up and just disable the hovercraft himself, rather than ordering his gang of chucklefucks to use every measure under the sun except for a simple blaster bolt to the engine. Also, we definitely need to address that they're all somehow struggling to keep up with this dude casually strolling towards his escape, despite driving these little things called speeder bikes. The whole point is that they go fast. It's not a terribly complicated concept, and they're only located all over the entire goddamn galaxy. Just use regular speeder bikes like everyone else does in this universe, for fuck's sake. Though through sheer dumb luck, our gang of glorified idiots actually managed to apprehend the mayor's aide. Okay, correction. The market that he ended up plowing through is the thing that apprehended him.
Where is he?
The mayor's gone. He's working with the Pikes.
Now, I only have a certain threshold for having my intelligence insulted until I end up becoming completely manic as a result, so I apologize in advance if it hasn't happened already. But why even bother with trying to have this character escape just to prevent revealing information that effectively everyone already knows? It's certainly not worth destroying the whole marketplace over, and now everyone in the entire town is going to be pissed at all of you for destroying presumably one of the few places in the city where people can go to buy and sell produce. If there was even an inkling of a reason for the citizens of Mos Espa to take Boba's crime enterprise seriously, it's essentially been smashed to bits in this scene. It's half a miracle that a majority of them haven't gathered around with pitchforks and booted him out of the palace already. Moving on, however, Boba decides to drop by the cantina, where he discovers that retarded Chewie is against the concept of having fun, so much to the point that he assaults patrons and starts trashing the place up. Fantastic. The establishment that Boba assured Twi'lek Lady in Episode 1 he'd protect is now being ransacked by the Wookiee that attempted to kill him just a few moments ago, and his response to the whole situation is just to sit there and do nothing. I'm so glad Disney decided to make this show. But Twi'lek Lady swoops in to potentially save the day by offering to wipe retarded Chewie's dead off the books if he promises to stop massacring all of her customers. Quite an interesting move on her part if I do say so myself. And by interesting, I mean incredibly stupid, since it effectively sends the message that people can rack up insane levels of debt and not have to pay any of it off so long as they make enough trouble. Granted, she wouldn't have to resort to such an extreme if Boba would just do the damn job that he'd promised he'd do, but her offer should still be enticing to even a complete brainlet like Krrsantan here. He's not necessarily raking in credits, especially after having just been fired by the Hutts for being such a god-awful assassin. Though taking her offer would be something a sensible person would do, and I tend to forget that everyone in the show has to actively work against their own self-interest in order for the plot to happen. Which is exactly what Boba does shortly later by offering retarded Chewie a job.
Looks like you could use a job.
I know I shouldn't linger on this since every character decision is basically void of any rationale, but it doesn't make this whole exchange any less painful, so I feel compelled to do so anyways. Retarded Chewie has just trashed one of his establishments that he was personally paid by Twi'lek Lady to protect, and has also just murdered a patron in cold blood. This isn't something that he should just let slide, and it most definitely isn't something that he should hire him over. What if this Wookiee has a tendency for flying off the handle and killing citizens for petty and trivial disputes? That ultimately would fall back on Boba and negatively affect his standing with the people of Mos Espa. Not to mention that hiring the person that just tried to kill him is an unbelievably crazy risk to take. There are loads of other mercenaries to choose from that aren't total brain-dead losers. At least in theory. However, it's revealed that the Pikes are apparently preparing for war, which forces Boba to gather all the leaders of the respective territories of Mos Espa. He proposes to them that they all should remain neutral in his conflict with the Pikes, because spice trading is bad. Okay, but why though? For the most part, it seems like they just simply want to do business here. Wouldn't it be really beneficial for intergalactic trade and help bolster the local economy? I don't see how spice running in and of itself is inherently a bad thing, and the Trandoshans seem to agree.
We make many credits from the sale of spice in our territories.
But Boba responds by offering to take out the Pike Syndicate for some reason, and that he'll demand no tribute from any of the leaders, so long as, again, they all agree to remain neutral during his conflict with the Pikes. Okay, but nothing about that addresses the core issue that they're all financially motivated to keep the Pikes around. They pull in a fair amount of money from the sale of spice in their territories, and the conversation only seems to get worse for Boba.
Why do you deserve to be the daimyo? What prevents us all from killing you and taking what we want?
That is a very excellent question, which never really gets answered during this whole meeting. I mean, Boba can pull scare tactics all he likes, but that doesn't and shouldn't alter the nature of the situation. He hasn't provided a substantial moral or practical reason as to why spice running is bad, nor any viable alternative for what would be a massive financial loss on their end. But Boba is so painfully oblivious to reality that he genuinely believes that none of them will end up betraying him and siding with the Pikes. Now, before we get too far along, I want to explain why I've decided to not cover a majority of what happens in Episode 5. While it's certainly one of the better episodes in the series, the fact of the matter is it belongs in The Mandalorian Season 3, not in a show that's supposed to be dedicated to Boba Fett. I've genuinely never seen a main character of their own series get sidelined so heavily, and it really has me questioning why Lucasfilm even bothered with making two separate shows for these characters, only to remerge them back into the same storyline anyways. It kind of speaks to the disjointed nature of the Book of Boba Fett. There are so many moments where it seems that the show has no idea what story it wants to tell. Is it an extensive character study on Boba, a thrilling drama about crime syndicates, or just an extension of The Mandalorian Season 3? All of these components mixed together don't work, but rather than spending time in the writer's room to address the core issue, it's far easier to get that Baby Yoda merch pumping. That's right, everyone's favorite plot device is back. Turns out Din decided to have some Beskar mithril made for Grogu and wants to deliver it to him in person. I guess he removed his helmet during the finale of Season 2 for no real reason at all then, since Din can hit up Baby Yoda and visit him whenever he wants. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of constructing a heartfelt goodbye scene if they're effectively already reunited before the events of Mando Season 3. Also, how did Din figure out what planet Grogu was on exactly? It's not like he and Robot Luke had an extensive chat. Finding him at this stage should be equivalent to trying to find a needle in a galaxy-sized haystack. However, when he arrives on the planet, he bumps into R2 and is led to a bunch of droids building a stone hut. But not just any stone hut. It's Luke's stone hut from The Last Jedi. Man, after all these years, Lucasfilm is still having a hard time taking that L, aren't they? The few remaining fans left have practically been on their knees with bated breath, begging for them to retcon the sequels. And not only have they refused, but they're now tying all of the existing spin-off material into this absolute abomination of a trilogy. I'm not sure why anyone genuinely believed that Disney would ever admit that the sequels were a mistake, or that they would even make the effort to retcon any mistake to begin with. But after realizing that no one is home, the droids decide to build him a bench so that he can take a nap, where he's then woken up by Ahsoka. So first off, holy hell, how many cameos are we going to pull out of this clown car of a show? And why is she here exactly? I thought she made it pretty clear that she wasn't interested in helping train a new generation of Jedi, yet she's suddenly on this planet seeking out the only active Jedi in the entire galaxy? I'm getting some rather mixed signals here, Ahsoka. But she decides to take Din on a walk, and during their whole conversation, she tries to explain why it's not a good idea for Baby Yoda to see him.
Grogu misses you a great deal. If he sees you, it will only make things more difficult for him.
Isn't your whole thing they were exiled from the Jedi Order, though? Why would you have any investment in Grogu training in the old ways of the Jedi or removing himself from any attachments, especially when Luke is living proof as to why those teachings are fundamentally flawed? And while we're on the subject, let's talk about Luke, because calling this lifeless CGI husk Luke is being far too generous. While I can certainly understand why people would initially be excited to see a synthesized, emulated version of post-Return of the Jedi Luke training Grogu and interacting with others, I don't think those same people are aware of the even further catastrophic damage that has been inflicted onto his character. And contrary to what many people boldly proclaim to be fact, this is not the real Luke Skywalker. First off, it's incredibly bizarre to see post-Return of the Jedi Luke instructing his potential new Padawan the old teachings of the Jedi, and suggesting that Grogu should forego attachments altogether in order to further his training. Especially since his attachment to his father is what ultimately saved his life, that gave Anakin some ounce of redemption, to be able to look upon his son with his own eyes. Not to mention that it's wildly hypocritical of Luke to lecture Grogu on foregoing attachments when one of the two choices that he offers him is the lightsaber of Yoda, his former Jedi Master. If that's not an attachment, then I simply don't know what is. But barring all of that, we also shouldn't gloss over that this Luke is having an infant make an incredibly important life decision that either has him spending his life training as a Jedi, or going on cool, dangerous adventures with his surrogate plot armor-wearing dad. Gee, I wonder which one he'll choose. The whole point why Din left him with Luke in the first place is because he believed that his dangerous lifestyle wasn't what was best for Grogu. And considering the obvious fact that children don't know what's best for themselves, it's incredibly irresponsible of Luke to task a literal baby with the weight of choosing to be a Jedi or not. Many will attempt to justify all these large, gaping stab wounds in the script by claiming that, at least it's better than the sequels. But it's abundantly clear that this new corporate puppet version of Lucasfilm's only intent is undermining the legacy of Star Wars. Han is dead. Leia is dead. They should have let Boba stay dead, and now they've zombified Luke, only to further spit on his nearly lifeless, artificial body. No matter how technically impressive the visuals and CGI may be, no matter how much fan service they inject into these shows and films, it doesn't change the reality that Disney and Lucasfilm have no desire of preserving Star Wars. Everything about this universe and these characters have been sacrificed at the altar of corporate greed, and people are consuming the sludge with thunderous applause. But anyways, despite Din flying all this way to deliver this gift of Baby Yoda in person, he decides on the spot to just leave the Beskar Mithril with Ahsoka and fuck off back to Mos Eisley, where he then is approached by Fennec to work for Boba.
By any chance, are you looking for work?
Might could be.
Pay is good.
Tell him it's on the house.
Why in the absolute holy hell are you turning down money? Isn't traveling between planets expensive? Plus, your track record with crashing ships isn't exactly great, and seeing as the one you're piloting now is practically held together with duct tape, you're gonna need all the money you can get to keep that thing running. I just don't understand why everyone is so terrible at being a mercenary in this show. However, we then cut to the palace where Boba is briefing everyone about the current situation. As if it wasn't obvious enough, he lays out that they're far outnumbered to take on the Pikes, though Din's first and only recommendation for recruiting foot soldiers are the farmers and miners of Mos Pelgo. You mean the town that you convinced to take on a crate dragon and got half their people killed, you incessant donkey? I can't imagine that any of them have enough training to take on Pike Syndicate mercs, or that they're all that giddy with excitement to take part in a conflict they have absolutely no involvement with. And they more than likely wouldn't have gotten involved had Cad Bane not shown up out of the ether and murdered their marshal in cold blood like a total psychopath. Imagine begging for a live-action depiction of this character, and the first thing Dave Filoni does is have him make such a boneheaded decision that it rallies the whole town to interfere with the Pikes spice-running operation. Speaking of which, back at the cantina, it appears initially that the Pikes have arrived to conduct business, only to shortly learn that they've actually planted an explosive inside the bar.
Wait! You forgot your Captuna!
Question? Why did you just demolish one of the main hubs for trade and networking in Mos Espa? Aren't you trying to gain influence to establish your spice running operation here? I know this is technically Boba's establishment, but all you've effectively accomplished is pissing off the entire town and limiting your trade options. Not to mention, why even bother incorporating Twilight Lady into this script just to arbitrarily kill her off? She had practically no impact on the plot, and no one seems to give a shit about the fact that she's dead in the next episode. Which of course brings us to the finale, or as I like to call it, plot armor the episode, because by God it sure is in full force throughout. So we start things off with Boba and Fennec standing in the rubble of the explosion.
We are at war.
It was inevitable.
Wow, astute observation, Boba. What did you think any of this meant? That there was a gas leak? Also, all of this was inevitable? I'm not so sure about that. If the both of you had just left them to their business, I doubt they would have felt compelled to commit arson. But hey, what do I know? However, Din then arrives with some very questionable information.
Cop Vanth is raising a garrison for us.
What price did you negotiate?
Free.
They will?
Things are tough around here. But I'll see what I can do.
What price did you negotiate?
Free.
I'm not sure how you came to that conclusion exactly, and again, it probably would have been helpful if you had more than one place to recruit mercs from. Between Din and Boba's respective contacts from both of them working as bounty hunters, they should have quite the recruiting pool to choose from. But as they're all discussing strategy, one of the Hypervespa idiots decides to make a suggestion.
And where do you propose we wait for reinforcements?
Here.
We're staying. The people who live here need our protection.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
I don't think holding a shootout with the Pikes in town is necessarily protecting the town. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. And if there's that much of a concern that these mercs are just going to start randomly gunning down citizens, then just move everybody inside the palace. It makes no sense whatsoever to hunker down here when you have a literal fortress at your immediate disposal. But for some god-unknown reason, Boba decides to drop his entire argument and fortify in this run-down bar with practically no protection. Meanwhile, Cad Bane arrives in Mos Eisley to deliver news of Freetown to the Pikes.
Was your venture successful?
You won't have to worry about Freetown.
I wouldn't be so sure of that, especially since you gunned down their leader in cold blood for no practical reason whatsoever. There's this little thing called revenge, and most people tend to seek it out whenever they get screwed over. However, the three of them begin to discuss strategy.
The Fett Gatra is taking refuge in the ruins of the sanctuary. It will take extreme measures to remove them.
What are you talking about? There are 5 people holding up in a rundown bar. You run an actual syndicate, just swarm them with mercs and use more explosives to flush them out. How is that any more of an extreme measure than blowing up the building the first time? It's honestly rather amazing that anything is able to get done in this universe, since everyone seems to operate solely on incompetence. We then cut away to Luke's X-Wing landing in Mechanic Lady's hangar, only to find that Grogu is sitting in the pilot seat and that R2 flew them both here. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Luke Skywalker, General of the Rebellion, the main head of the new Jedi Order, sent a baby unaccompanied to fly clear across the galaxy to land at a random spaceport in the hopes of delivering him to Din. Did the thought ever occur in that thick CGI skull of yours that he could have been abducted, or God forbid, killed by raiders? I know R2 is kind of the goat and everything, but there's only so much he can do in an ambush. Why couldn't you or Ahsoka personally deliver him? Making sure Baby Yoda doesn't die during transit should take way more priority than making sure some stupid rocks get stacked. And none of this is supported by R2 just suddenly giving up Grogu to a lady that he doesn't even know. You'd think Luke would have strictly instructed R2 to keep the cockpit locked and only relinquish Baby Yoda to Din personally. Maybe he did and R2's wiring got a little fuzzy, but either way, this whole exchange is catastrophically dumb. Speaking of which, back at the rundown cantina, Fennec explains that the Pikes haven't arrived in full numbers yet, but that people are posted at 3 different spots in town and will alert Boba whenever they arrive.
As you can see, all our flanks are covered. Nobody is sneaking up on us.
Okay, but you have like 7 people posted all across of Mos Espa. There are still large gaps they could take to sneak up on you from. And worrying about getting flanked wouldn't have been such a massive issue if you all had just decided to hold up in the palace, which is arguably the most fortified building in the entire region. But we discover that Finnick is just a little bit off the mark with her earlier claim. In fact, Cad Bane is just right outside with all of his goons.
All our flanks are covered. Nobody is sneaking up on us.
Lord Fett, there is someone here to see you.
Now, I do have to say that went from 0 to 100 real quick, and considering how easy it was for Blue Man Group here to post up with this squad, it should take the Syndicate practically no effort whatsoever to swarm the entire building. Though what also wouldn't require hardly any effort is for one of Cad's snipers to take a pop shot at Boba. For some god-unknown reason, instead of talking to Cad while behind cover, he decides the best course of action is just to casually walk out into the middle of the open. Keep in mind, too, that Cad's whole plan was to draw him out of cover to begin with.
I think I have an idea how to draw Boba Fett out.
So why the hell do none of them shoot him? This is just one of the many prominent examples of plot armor working in action. All of our characters are practically caked in the damn stuff, and it doesn't get any less egregious moving forward. However, Cad also reveals to Boba that he gunned down Cobb Vanth, and Boba thinks that must naturally mean that the reinforcements from Mos Pelgo aren't coming.
I wouldn't be counting on the people of Freetown to be coming anytime soon. I paid Marshal Vanth a visit. You should have never left him without his armor.
You killed Vanth. The reinforcements aren't coming.
You know, I find it incredibly strange that everyone in Disney's backwards-ass depiction of the Star Wars universe comes to wildly incorrect conclusions from information that would clearly indicate the opposite result. Do both of them just not understand what revenge is as a concept? But Finnick ends up convincing Boba to not shoot any of them, which makes Cad sad and suddenly leave for some reason. Because I guess this is just how tense altercations between two crime syndicates typically go down? I'm not entirely sure what his restraint in shooting Cad is supposed to signify, really. And unlike Boba, Cad isn't wearing any armor. All it'd take for him is to get one well-placed blaster bolt and Cad's immediately taken out of the picture. There doesn't seem to be a valid reason as to why either one of them shouldn't shoot the other. Especially since after this whole exchange, Hover Vespa Chick radios in that all the different crime factions are turning on Boba's crew.
The locals are attacking!
I thought we had a treaty. So did I.
In a show that's supposedly written with the premise of delving into the criminal underbelly of Tatooine, not only is it incredibly disjointing for someone the likes of Boba to have no contingency plan for if he gets betrayed, but that no one in his circle even considers that being a possibility either. With a storyline where every character has distinctive goals and ambitions, it's downright weird that no one is capable of realizing that other people would be driven by ulterior motives. The closest thing they have to a backup plan is something that Finnick just bullshits up on the spot.
Does the Pikes Syndicate still operate out of Mos Eisley?
Mos Eisley? Yes, now that I think of it, indeed they do.
You've been holding Penis Face hostage for all this time, and you're just now asking him this? And you're also just now considering sending your master assassin that you have on payroll to go take them out? If you had just had the common sense to do all this 3 episodes ago, this entire shootout wouldn't have happened. And you'd still have your bar that you were paid money to protect. I'm starting to think you're not really cut out for this line of work, Boba. However, I don't want to gloss over how impractical it is to have the few numbers Boba possesses scattered all over Mos Espa, only to in turn have them all retreat back to the bar, when fortifying the bar was the Hover Vespa gang's whole idea to begin with. I know the showrunners were desperate to toss a betrayal scene into the mix, but you could have very easily depicted that by having all the different factions join in swarming the bar with the Pikes, which would be the most logically sound thing for them to do. Boba is their main target after all. Now, I could most certainly go into autistic levels of detail about why everything about this action scene doesn't work, but I think the most glaring issue is that this show has to constantly remove risks from the equation by either having our main characters stand out in the open and take out enemies flawlessly, or tank a barrage of blaster fire with their god-tier Jesus armor. How am I, as the viewer, expected to be invested in an action scene when it's adamantly clear that our protags are practically immune to all damage? But our heroes, though it's weird to call them that since they're technically criminals, end up driving off the Pike Syndicate mercs with the help of citizens from Mos Pelgo. Turns out people do get pissed whenever you shoot their marshal. Though now that Tatooine has been ridden of this horrible spice-raining syndicate, everyone can finally celebrate. Or at least initially, because unlike Boba, the Pikes actually have a plan B. I mean, granted it's not much of a plan B since they've now activated their downgraded Droidekas. which you might be confused as to why I would consider them to be downgrades. After all, they're 10 times the size and possess higher grade firepower. And yes, that would be a significant upgrade if it weren't for the fact that these things are more inaccurate than stormtroopers. But don't just accept my word for it. Let's compare these droids with their counterparts in a scene from The Phantom Menace. So as Qui-Gon is in the midst of trying to cut through the blast door to reach the Trade Federation officials, Droidekas roll up on their position. And because their weaponry and shield generators are so efficient, it causes him to stop what he's doing, though they both still end up getting overwhelmed and are forced to retreat. But jump to present-day Lucasfilm, these Scorpionic droids aren't even able to hit a target that's clearly straight in front of them. It's rather embarrassing in all honesty, and it makes you wonder why they didn't just use regular Droidekas to begin with. They'd surely be way more effective. However, through the power of exposition, Din reveals why their standard weapons aren't enough to deal with these droids.
Our energy weapons can't get through and our kinetic weapons have too much velocity.
Are you ripping off Dune? Because it kind of feels like you're ripping off Dune.
The slow blade penetrates the shield.
Not that I expected modern Lucasfilm to be above creative bankruptcy, but you'd still think they'd be a little more subtle about it at least. After learning this though, Boba decides to jetpack off to get more help. And keep in mind that the sole reason he does this is because he believes that the droids are going to end up destroying the city if left unchecked. It is very clear that his intention is to minimize as much structural damage to the city as possible. I won't go too much further into detail, but we'll stick a pin in that one for later. Regardless, as Din is making his way through the street, he ends up bumping into Mechanic Lady. And we learn two very valuable things about her during the scene. That she's unfathomably oblivious to pure destruction, and that she's also brought an infant into a war zone. Great job, R2, you definitely left Baby Yoda in the best of hands. But as the three of them are about to not get shot by a Scorpionic droid, Boba swoops in to save the day. Question. Why didn't you just use your ship instead? I'd imagine it's way less vulnerable to blasters, and seismic charges are overpowered as hell. I mean, you've pretty much already dropped the ball with protecting the city from immense collateral damage anyway, so I'm not entirely sure why the Slave One wouldn't have been the go-to option here. However, after having demolished these two droids and half the city along with them, Cad Bane once again appears out of the ether and scares off the Rancor with his flamethrower. So I guess it can just tank blaster shots like nothing, but standard fire is the thing that does it, eh? Fantastic. Also, where the hell have you been this entire time? You only decided to do something about the Rancor now that it's destroyed both of your mega death robots? Granted, they were awfully shit at doing the one thing they were designed to do, but I'm sure they're still expensive. And as stupid as these recent string of events are, it still sets up a deadly standoff between Boba and Cad. Unfortunately, there are a lot of aspects about this whole duel scene that I don't quite get. For starters, it's very clear that the Pikes have lost to this point. Most of their mercs are dead, along with presumably two really valuable assets having been reduced to scrap. I have no idea what incentive there is for Cad to hang around, or why he desperately wants Boba dead. And it certainly doesn't help that the writers unironically pulled a Syndrome monologue.
Consider this my final lesson. Look out for yourself.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing! I can't believe it.
You know, I must admit, I was just so invested in this villain that showed up toward the end of the last episode, and is now dead in this one. It sure would have been a shame if they dropped the stupid Sand People arc, or Mando Season 3 material, and actually developed Cad throughout the course of the plot. That just would have been entirely too much. Oh man, Star Wars won't be the same without him. Anyways, it turns out the Rancor has gone full King Kong and is now destroying the city. Din attempts to calm it down by taking the reins, but nearly gets eaten and then is yeeted into a building. So there's a number of things wrong here. One, how is it that this thing is so deathly afraid of fire one minute, to the point where it goes on a full-blown roid rage, but then the next minute totally not freak out after eating flames? And 2, Din should just straight up be dead here. I'm sorry, I know Pure Beskar has basically been blessed with Star Wars holy water in this universe, but the sheer force from the Rancor bite alone should have killed him. And you're meaning to tell me that this jackass can also get yeeted through a building and be perfectly fine? You know what? I'm gonna say it. Din is a Gary Stu. As long as he has his armor on, he's straight up invincible. Nothing can seriously harm him in any way, shape, or form. But this simply wouldn't be a spin-off Star Wars show if Baby Yoda didn't pull some insanely overpowered force ability out of his ass. I know he's just had training with Luke and everything, but I don't think force hypnosis really falls under that umbrella, let alone force hypnotizing a Rancor. Now, he does typically pass out from doing something crazy like this, so at least there's some form of consistency with how his abilities function. But what are the limits of his abilities exactly? Because as far as I can tell, there doesn't really seem to be a limit, and the stakes continuously go up and up. Though I suppose that's a topic for another video. Speaking of which, that effectively wraps things up for this review, critique, whatever you want to call it for the Book of Boba Fett. And I think if the show has taught us anything, it's that if you want something done, don't hire a mercenary because they are probably some of the most brain-dead people in the entire galaxy. I apologize for this video taking longer than intended, but there's a lot of material with the show that just simply doesn't work. Because the reality that many remaining fans refuse to face is that no one currently at Lucasfilm truly understands what Star Wars is, and as a result, their incompetence continues to undermine legacy characters and established canon. If there are those of you who still enjoy the show for what it is, then that's perfectly acceptable. But to call it Star Wars or a proper continuation of Boba's character is another matter entirely, because it's so wildly detached from the source material it now intentionally butchers on screen for profit. The destruction of this franchise hasn't stopped at the sequels, and it won't stop until Disney has completely had their fill.